Okay, welcome everybody to our first ever screencast for AP US History. So I just want to kind of lay out for you guys a little bit about why we're doing this. I feel like it's really going to help us to analyze the material a little bit better than we've been able to do in class so far, and really get a much deeper, better understanding of US history. So we're going to start off every screencast in a very similar way to the way we start off actual class. So the key to this is you have to read the text first. If you don't read first, it's going to be very difficult to kind of understand the material that we go over here in the video lecture. So hopefully all of you have already scanned through the 10 pages, read through the 10 pages, and you have a basic understanding of the text. So let's just take a second and see if you can answer this question. I'm going to give you about a minute to think about it and write down an answer. And I do want you to write down an answer. So which new territories desired to become a state started off the biggest sectional controversy since Missouri? How and why? So I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to think about it, write down an answer. Okay, so if you were able to come up with California and you could understand the reasons for why, which we're going to go through in the lecture, then you've understood the reading enough to kind of continue with the video here. If you haven't done that and you didn't know California, it's your responsibility as a good student to kind of go back and relook at some of the chapter and reread it before you kind of continue with the lecture. So for those of you who did understand, and we're going to kind of continue here and start our lecture off. So really where we're going here is sectional tension in the United States, which is really going to start to grow tremendously after the Mexican-American War. It's there before, and it's been there for a long time, but after the Mexican-American War, it's really going to kind of come to a head here in the 1850s. So first we're going to take a look at the Mexican Cession, a little bit of review. Second, we're going to look at California's role in all of this. And third, we're going to take an in-depth look at the Compromise of 1850. Alright, so first thing that I want to take a look at is the Mexican Cession and some of the states that we gained. So you know that we've gained already at this point Texas from annexation in 1845. So the new states that we're going to gain from the Mexican Cession, or new territories at the time, are going to be New Mexico, a little bit of part of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nebraska, and California. Now, I just want to kind of put the size of these states into scope for you guys, because as Americans, we very rarely, I think about the actual size of our country. When we completed Manifest Destiny, sea to shining sea here, with the Mexican Cession, we gained a tremendous territory. The entirety of the Mexican Cession here, all of these southwestern states, they're the equivalent of size of the Louisiana Purchase that Jefferson purchased from Napoleon in 1803. So we're talking about a huge amount of territory here. Texas alone is bigger than France and Europe. Arizona is bigger than Great Britain. And if you take this from all the way from San Francisco across the country to New York, that equivalent distance is like going from Madrid in Spain all the way to Moscow in Russia, which is going to take you through about 14 or 15 European countries. So put that in your mind, kind of the size of the United States. It's huge. After we have kind of completed Manifest Destiny, we have a tremendous country. And that can lead to a lot of good things, meaning tons of resources, tons of manpower, and it's going to help us eventually become a world power, but it also can lead to intense sectional differences because the distance makes the sections of the country very unique geographies, and it's really going to kind of lead to a lot of problems here in the 1850s. So when you look at the Mexican Cession itself, the crown jewel of these new territories is definitely going to be California. It has the best land and some of the best resources available. So the thing that's really going to spark off California's development is going to be what happens in 1848. So in 1848, on this guy named John Sutter, his mill, they're going to find gold. And this is really going to lead to the explosion of California's population in a very, very short period of time. So basically, as soon as we get California and we get this territory from Mexico in 1848, people are going to start rushing in because they hear about the gold that's discovered here in California. So people really start coming in droves in 1849. And so they're coming to all of these different areas here, the Sierra Nevada, parts of near Sacramento, near San Francisco, because they've heard that gold has been discovered here. And this really leads to the development of all of California. Now, they get the nickname the 49ers. So if you follow football at all, you know that San Francisco, their football team is called the San Francisco 49ers. And they're called this, nicknamed after the gold rush of 1849. And so all different types of people are coming for different reasons. Now, the majority of people are coming to find gold. They're looking to get rich. And these people are called prospectors. And some are coming from the east, looking for an opportunity to make money. Some are actually coming from Mexico, a small amount, to make money. And even people are coming from China. I mean, China hears about it. And some people come from China to start for the same reasons, to try and get rich, to try and make some money. So some very famous Americans actually go out, and either they're prospectors or they're kind of involved in the development of California. So an author that you might know named Mark Twain, who wrote The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, he's actually out there in California at the time, and he writes a book about it. He writes some books about his experiences in California. Some other famous Americans that are out there, Levi Strauss, so obviously very popular in America to wear jeans. So the first jeans were invented by Levi Strauss out in California because the prospectors were looking for a pair of pants that was not going to wear down, that was rugged while they were doing their work out there. And he actually becomes a millionaire out in California, not by prospecting, but by selling things to the prospectors. And that's important to understand. A lot of the people who became very rich out in California are not necessarily people looking for gold. It's people who are willing to sell things to people who are looking for gold. So Strauss is a good example of that. Two other guys who kind of go out there, they're brothers, Henry and William Fargo. So you might know them from Wells Fargo Bank. And they set up their first bank out in California during this time period. And again, they make a ton of money off of this, not by prospecting for gold, but by taking advantage of the situation here. Okay, so when California's population explodes, it really brings to light a new problem in the United States, one that we've faced several times before. But this happens much quicker than expected. We just gained the territory from Mexico in 1848. And by 1849, California is already petitioning the United States government to become a state. They have enough population, they have all of the criteria. If you remember, when we first talked about this back in the beginning of class, we first talked about this Northwest Territory right here. And this was actually under the Articles of Confederation in 1787. They passed the Northwest Ordinance, which said and kind of set this criteria for becoming a state, and it's largely based off of the population of the region. You need a certain population to become a state. And at this point, California had achieved it. In all of a year, California had reached the necessary requirements to become a state. Now, this kind of set off a firestorm of controversy here. If you look at the territory, we had certain rules for each portion of westward expansion and each portion of territory that we gained. The original ones, out here, what we got from the Treaty of Paris. The Northwest Territory was free to slavery. The Southwest Territory was open to slavery. The next one, the Louisiana Territory. Remember, we passed the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which said anything above the 36° 30 north latitude was going to be a free state, minus Missouri, and anything south of it was going to be open to slavery. So each time we get a new territory, we had a new plan for how you would decide whether it would be a free state or a slave state. Now, this brings up a problem because we haven't figured it out yet with the Mexican Cession. What are we going to do? Are we going to let the people decide? Is it going to extend the same line from Missouri? What is going to be the situation? Now, some members of Congress kind of foresaw this problem even before we actually gained the territory. So one of these people that kind of saw this happening and tried to come up with a plan was a guy named David Wilmot. Now, David Wilmot, he comes up with a proposal in 1846 called the Wilmot Proviso. And he was a Democratic senator from Pennsylvania. And his proposal was to ban slavery in its entirety in all of the Mexican Cession. Now, the year is kind of interesting if you think about it. We had not won the war yet, 1846. We were basically just starting the war against Mexico. So he's already thinking ahead, like, listen, this is what should happen if we do win the war against Mexico. Now, if you remember from previous chapters, you should be thinking now about how is he even able to speak about slavery. There was a rule in place known as the gag rule that went into place under Martin Van Buren, who was a president in the late 1830s. And basically what this rule said was that anytime anyone from any political party brings up the issue of slavery and making a law about it, it's automatically going to go to this special committee that tables the bill. And tabling the bill means that they're just not going to talk about it. So it gets known as the gag rule. So basically we just don't talk about slavery. Now, how did David Wilmot slip through the cracks? Well, he slipped through the cracks because, number one, look at his political party. He's a Democrat. And something that we didn't talk about too much when we talked about the Mexican War, but what's important is that Democrats were kind of seen as favoring the war more so, and Whigs were kind of seen as opposing the war. So the president at the time, Zachary Taylor, he's a Democrat. And so because David Wilmot was a Democrat and also voted for the war, nobody really expected him to say anything about slavery. It was the Whigs who were outspoken against the war because the Whigs looked at this territory here as the South trying to extend slavery. So senators like a new senator at the time, Abraham Lincoln, a Whig at the time, is going to speak out against calling this just trying to extend slavery to the new territories. Because if you really look at it, if you take this Missouri Compromise line out here, without the Mexican Cession, basically all of this territory is in the Free Territory Zone. So the South is going to become a minority. It's just a matter of time. So you have the Whigs arguing about this, but nobody really expects David Wilmot to say something like this. So when you think about this proposal, you should in your mind connect this to something we've already talked about earlier in our class, the last time a major compromise was made. And so we're going to take a look again at Missouri. When we talked about the Missouri Compromise of 1820, before that happens, a senator from New York, James Talmadge, proposes his amendment. And basically what he said was the same thing that Wilmot is saying about the Mexican Cession territory, he was saying about the Louisiana territory. That every single state or territory that wants to become a state should be banned of slavery here. And if you remember, this kind of brought a firestorm of criticism and really kind of divided the country along sectional lines when he made this proposal. And eventually Henry Clay kind of comes to the rescue and makes this Missouri Compromise here with the 36 degree 30 north latitude line. Now, when you look at Wilmot's proposal, it's kind of the same thing happens. And so the Southerners are going to kind of dig in their heels against it, and the Northerners obviously for it. So it never really gets passed here, the Wilmot Proviso. And so when California wants to come into the Union, there is no plan for it. And so now we really have to figure something out in a hurry. So in comes our great compromiser again, Henry Clay. So before we get to Henry Clay's role and what he decides or he tries to propose in his compromise of 1850, we first have to get some of the major players who are involved here and what their thoughts are on the Mexican Cession. So the first one is going to be our president at the time. So Zachary Taylor